Hello and welcome to the course of History of India covered by Plus Prameshi Library. So here, instead of covering the very intricate details about any particular event, we are trying to cover the entire history starting from the ancient, going to medieval and then going to modern Indian history, so that we can show you how the entire history can be covered in just one wall chart. So this is what we are talking about. This is a wall chart that contains every. We have tried to cover at least every significant event that might have happened. But if you also feel that there is some event that you want to mention here, then I've already told you that please have your sticky notes ready and start writing on them and stick it over this wall chart. In this way, you will have entire history on just one wall chart. Okay, this is me, Supriya Singhal, the mentor for this course, and we will continue from where we left in the last video. So we have already covered what? We have covered a lot of things in the medieval India and only 2 or 3 things are remaining. Okay, first of all, you should know that medieval India is a time which starts around 1206, as I told you. Okay, and it goes on till around about 1700s or something. Okay, not the exact year, but somewhere around 1707, 1727. Okay, if you have to actually say that in medieval India there were 2 great empires, then you actually say that 2 empires which ruled over Delhi. So in North India or in Delhi, the 2 empires that came one after the other in succession were Delhi Sultanate and then came the Mughal Empire. In Delhi Sultanate, we've already covered that there were 5 major dynasties like Slaves, Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Sayyids and Lodhis. Okay. And after defeating Lodhi is what Mughal Empire came into being. So now you might get confused as to then where was Khandesh, where was the Bahamani kingdom, where was the Vijayanagar Empire. So if I have to draw the map of India, okay, so you will realize that North India, this Delhi is the seat. Okay, so here you will find first is Delhi Sultanate and then there is Mughal Empire coming. Okay, but here you can say round about below Narmada, you will find that there are like 5 kingdoms of uh, Bahamani. Okay, this is Bahamani kingdom, and when it gets split, like when it gets split after it loses its power, they get separated into 5 kingdoms of Berar, Bidar, Ahmednagar, Khandesh, and Golconda. Okay, so you will find that these are the 5 kingdoms, and apart from that, we already know that in Karnataka you already had a Vijayanagar Empire. Okay, so now I hope everything is clear that which empire is coming or which dynasty is coming. So now after having discussed so many other things, we are left with the Mughal Empire. Okay, so Mughal Empire, you should know, it started when actually Delhi Sultanate ended. So Delhi Sultanate ends, basically becomes the Mughal Empire's starting point. Okay, so the Delhi Sultanate's last dynasty was Lodhis, and within Lodhis also there was Behlul Lodhi, Sikandar Lodhi, and Ibrahim Lodhi. So Ibrahim Lodhi was the last one who had to fight the war with Babur. Okay, so you will realize in 1526, okay, Sultan Ibrahim Lodi was defeated and he was killed by Babur in the first battle of Panipat. Now, before we move forward, you should understand a point is that there has been a question in UPSC mains asking you that why so many battles were fought at Panipat. Okay, so for this you should understand that Panipat is where? See, Panipat is basically a plain area. Okay, and it is situated very close to Delhi. So now, suppose if you have to fight a war, so Delhi is the seat of the emperor. So it's better to not fight a war here because it might create a chaos. So what you do is you try to go to outskirts of the city, which is nearby the city, so that you can refill whatever you want. Okay, but still it is not that close that enemy can just come and destroy it. So first point is this. Second is that Panipat was a very plain area. Okay, in plain area, what happens is that both the sides which are waging the war, they are able to see each other's army very well. They can actually try to guess the extent of other or opposition parties. You can say army. So it becomes easier for even waging a war, because in plain area it's much easier to fight where both parties become at equal terrain rather than in a mountain, and where the party acquiring the highest terrain becomes like more advantageous. Okay, so plain area was another point. Then third, you can say basically is that fertile plain, because see, if the armies are waging a war, they might or might not get supplies from any other state. Okay, it depends at who are their allies. But if you are going to stay for a war and it might go to a month or a 2 month, it's better that you have a plain where it's easy that you can produce your own agriculture. You can basically start producing your own crops so that you can feed your army. Okay, so you will realize that Panipat also gave them this opportunity. So these are just the three reasons, but you will find that once you actually study the location of Panipat, you will find three or four more reasons. Okay, so my idea is to introduce you to the previous year questions and also to the questions that can come forward, and you should know that how to go about them. Okay, now before we move forward, after understanding the importance of Panipat, you should also understand that there were three battles fought at Panipat. Okay, and this was a question asked in KVC also. Okay, so there were three battles fought at Panipat: first, second, and third. The first one was fought at 1526, which was between Ibrahim Lodi versus Babur. Okay, and here Babur wins and Mughal Empire gets established and Delhi Sultanate comes to an end. The second battle of Panipat, okay, was fought between Hemu and Akbar. Okay, and the third battle of Panipat was fought in the fought in 1761. It was fought between Mughals and Ahmad Shah Abdali, but from Mughals actually Marathas fought the war. Okay, so this was the battle where Ahmad Shah Abdali won and Marathas lost the war, and finally we say that Marathas' magnanimity of their power came to an end. Okay, so after understanding Panipat's importance and three battles of Panipat, now let's just move to the first battle of Panipat. So in the first battle of Panipat, you will realize that Ibrahim Lodi is fighting with Babur. Even though Babur does not have a very big army as Ibrahim Lodi, you will find that Babur has a much more advanced technology things. Okay, he is the one who's also having Barud. Okay, so what is happening is that Babur is having advanced equipments, and you can say war artillery and everything, and that is why he is able to win the war. Okay, Babur rule was actually not much, but you should remember that 2-3 battles that Babur fought, so that you know whom he fought with and how he actually acquired. So if you know Rana Sangha is a very famous ruler of Mewar region of Rajasthan. Okay, so before we move forward, just for a little bit of understanding, otherwise there's so much confusion about what is Mewar, what is Marwar. Okay, so this is like a typical Rajasthan if I have to tell you. Okay, so here you will find that this part is Jaisalmer. This part is actually Jaipur Alwar area. This is I like this. Okay, so this is Sri Ganganagar and Hanumangarh wala area. And this is Kota and Bundi area, which is also called as the Jhalawad region. And then this is basically Udaipur, Pratapgarh, Banswada, Dungarpur, etc. And in the middle you will find here is the Aravali going, and here you will find that Sirohi, and then Jaipur, Ajmer, Nagaur. So all these cities are coming, and here you will find is Bharatpur and Dholpur. Okay, so now this is like a rough map of Rajasthan. Here always remember the areas of Udaipur. Okay, in and around Udaipur they are called as Mewar. Okay, and the areas around Jodhpur and Jodhpur, this one area, okay, Jodhpur area, they are called as the Marwad. Okay, now the area which is around this Alwar area, okay, which is basically Alwar and which is touching the Haryana part, they are called as Mewat. Okay, Mewatis they are called. Similarly, you will find that Jaipur area is called as the Dhundar region. Okay, now this area, which is Sikar, Jhunjhunu, this one area here, Churu, Sikar, Jhunjhunu, these three are also called as the Shekhawati region. Okay, and finally you will have this Kota region, which is also called as the Hadoti plateau. Now I know you must be thinking that why am I teaching you this? This might be important for the state service examination, but what's the relation with the UPSC? See, the point is UPSC, you will find that there were a lot of wars with the Rajputana state, specifically of the Mughal Empire, because Rajput kings never wanted to lose their independence and be called as a dominion of some bigger Mughal Empire. So here you will find that there were a lot of wars that were happening between Mughal Empire as well as the like different kings of the Rajput dynasties which are ruling in the different regions, and hence these regions become important. Okay, so I'm hoping that you will just pause the video and draw this in your copy so that forever it stays, with you, and you know exactly how can you divide this region. So now when I say that, the battle of Khanua was fought, wherein Babur defeated the Rana Sangha. So Rana Sangha is the ruler of Mewar. Okay, so now you understood that Rana Sangha is basically ruling in and around Udaipur region. Okay, so let me just clear the screen and then we move forward. So now we should remember two battles. First is the Battle of Khanua, which was fought in 1527. Second was 1528 battle, which was Battle of Chandedi. And third was the 1529 battle, which was Battle of Ghagra River. And these three battles are fought by Babur to basically establish his empire and also expand his empire. Okay, in all these three battles, he is able to win against the opponent. But finally, you will realize in 1530, just after 4 years, like he succeeded only in 1526, but just after 4 years, he actually died. And now the empire is basically given to the Humayun. So now in Babur's time, before we move forward, you should know that who are Mughals. See, Mughals have two, basically Mughals have a lineage, they have a paternal lineage and they have a maternal lineage. Paternal in the sense who was their father, grandfather, great grandfather, etc. And maternal lineage means who was like the nani side, the mother side. So from parent side they belong to the Timur dynasty, okay, and from mother side they belong to the Chinggis Khan. So actually, if you see, so Mughals, they like the Babur and the Mughals, other Mughals, they used to call themselves belonging to the Timurid dynasty because we all know that Mongols and Chinggis Khan were not very popular amongst everybody. So they did not want to call themselves, as an ancestry, having an ancestry of Mongols and Chinggis Khan. So they used to call themselves as a, you can say, as an basically as a future generation of the Timur dynasty. Okay, and secondly is that Mughal Empire did not have a system of transferring the entire property to the elder brother. So they had a system wherein basically the property was divided equally among the brothers, and then amongst them it was decided that who will become the ruler. So that is why you will find in Mughal Empire there are a lot of battles happening even between the the princes in the sense prince of the same king, because like everybody wants to become the ruler. Okay, so now see, in Mughal Empire we have already learned that first was the Babur, and now the second ruler that will come is basically his son Humayun. Okay, so now in 1530 after Babur's death comes the Humayun. See, Babur's rule was only for 4 years, and that is why you will find that most of his time actually went in fighting and expanding the empire. But still, from art and culture point of view, you might be learning about Tuzuke-Babri, which is basically a book written by Babur himself, wherein he wants to describe a lot of things like society and economy and polity, etc. And also, you will realize that Babur somewhere builds around two mosques, but not more, like not anything more than that, because he didn't have time period. Also, you can see only 4 years, and then that too 4 years are very busy in fighting and waging the wars. Now comes the Humayun in 1530. So a Humayun, you will realize that Humayun's rule can be divided into two parts. One is 1530 to 1540, and then it's 1555 to 1556. Okay. So why are we splitting the rule of Humayun into two parts? Because in between you will find that there was the establishment of Suri dynasty or Shesha Suri dynasty. Okay. So he actually established his empire in between of Humayun, and that is why you will find that Humayun has a break. So now we'll first cover this 1530 to 1545, then cover Shesha Suri, and then go to 1555 to 1556. So 1530 already Humayun has exceeded the empire of Babur. Then you will realize that Humayun actually is invading Malwa and Gujarat. Then there is a siege of Chunar. And here you will find 1537. It's very close to the time when Sher Shah Suri is there. So 1537 you will find that Sher Khan he plunders Gaur. Okay. And then 1537 to 40 are just the battle years between Sher Shah Suri and the Humayun. Okay. Now it was not like there was one battle. So in 1539, just like you remember, there was 1191 and 1192 AD 2 wars, Battle of Tarayan, wherein first Prithviraj Chauhan defeated the Muhammad Ghori, and in the second one he lost the war. Similarly, 1539 and 1540. So in 1539, you will realize that there was a war. So there are two wars, 1539 and 1540. So let me just write it here, 1539 and 1540. In 1539, in both the times the war is happening between Sher Suri and Humayun. Okay, but unlike 1191 and 1192, in both of these wars, actually Humayun loses. Okay, so in 1539, what is happening? That Sher Khan is able to. Sher Khan is the same guy who we call as Sher Shah Suri later. So he is able to defeat Humayun at the Battle of Chausa. Okay, and here you will realize that when Humayun is defeated, he somehow manages to escape. Okay, otherwise he would have been killed if he would have been caught by Sher Shah Suri. But he somehow manages to escape Sher Shah Suri's you can say attention, and then he decides that he will come back again and wage a war with Sher Shah Suri. So he comes back again in 1540 and he wages a war, and Sher Khan here is again able to defeat Humayun in the Battle of Kannauj. So now battle fought by Babur are Khanua, Chandedi and Ghagra, but by Humayun with the Sher Shah Suri are Chausa and Kannauj. Okay, Kannauj is the same place where, if you remember, I told you there was a tripartite struggle going on between Gurjar Pratihara, Palas and Rashtrakutas. So it's the same place. So here also battle is fought where Sher Shah Suri is again able to defeat Humayun, and then you will find that Humayun somehow manages to flee or escape the place and he goes to Lahore. Okay, so now 1540, when Sher Shah Suri has finally established and Humayun has escaped to Lahore, now we will read about some points of Sher Shah Suri as and when they come. But before that, you should know that Humayun and his wife, when they escaped to Lahore, they basically gave birth to Akbar. Okay, and Akbar was born in Umarpur. He was not born in India. Then you will realize in 1544, the conquest of Malwa and Marwar was done by the Sher Shah Suri. So now when I say Marwar, it is basically Jodhpur region. Okay. Now Humayun, Humayun is living, Humayun has already escaped to Lahore, but obviously, there's a threat that if he stays at a one particular place, he might get killed. So Humayun is seeking asylum in Persia. In 1545, see, just after 4 years of establishing, they actually Sher Shah Suri dies in a siege of Kalanjar. Okay, and then after that, actually the Muhammad Adil Shah, who was the son of Sher Shah Suri, he takes over the throne. Okay, then in 1550. Let me just rub it, otherwise it will become really untidy. So then, this goes on wherein Sher Shah Suri is actually, and his successor, like sons, etc., they're able to rule the empire beautifully till 1555 until Humayun comes back. So what happens is Humayun basically, you can say after 15 years, he tries to come back and he tries to gain the empire which he lost. And that is why there was a battle of Sirhind, wherein Humayun actually wins the war and he is able to recover the throne of Delhi, which 15 years back Sher Shah Suri took from him. Now, in 1556, there's a death of Humayun. Okay, so you might be wondering how sad it is that he has to live the entire, life like a person wandering here and there, and finally he's able to reclaim the throne, but he actually dies. And it's said that Humayun actually died while walking the stairs of his own library. So that's quite sad because he was very fond of stars and astronomy, etc. And he actually went to the top of library to study about them. But then when he was coming, he actually died falling on the stairs. So in just 1 year of gaining the empire, 1556, you will find Humayun is dead. And then comes basically the accession to Akbar. So when Akbar acceded the throne, he was very young guy. And this was the question asked in even KBC, that what was the age of Akbar when he acceded the throne. So this is the question I'm posing to you, that what was the age of Akbar when he acceded the throne from his father Humayun. Okay, and here you will find that Akbar actually Akbar is underage right now. Obviously, he cannot think of administrative decisions. So he is basically helped by a general officer, you can say, general. Who's the general guy who's helping him? General Bairam Khan. Okay. So General Bairam Khan is actually, you can say, helping him, and he is. See, you can say that Akbar is the ruler, but till the time he attains the age, Bairam Khan, okay, he'll be helping him to actually take the decisions. Okay, and so Akbar has already come to the power. Bairam Khan is helping him, and within Akbar, I told you that there will be second battle of Panipat fought now. The second battle of Panipat is fought between Akbar and Hemu, wherein Akbar is able to defeat the Afghan forces which were led by Hemu. So that is why I'm written here that 1556 to 60 is the regency of Behram Khan. It's actually Akbar only, but Behram Khan is obviously ruling the kingdom. Okay. Now 1561 you will find that Mughals have started invading again, and they start invasion of Malwa. 1564, see, Akbar is said to be a very what you can say, a very tolerant ruler, and he actually marries also the princess, okay, of Raja Bhanmal of Amber. You can see basically in Rajasthan, like just again, just to clarify before you forget. So there are different states, like there's Jodhpur, there's Bikaner, okay, then there is Udaipur, or yeah, there is Udaipur, then we have the Kota, then we have Amber, okay. So you will find then there is Bharatpur here. So all of these states are being ruled by different rulers. So in Amber you have these Kachawa Rajputs which were ruling. Okay, and one of these Kachawa Rajputs was Raja Bhanmal, whose daughter was actually married to Akbar. Okay, so now you will find that Akbar is trying to create matrimonial alliances with the other people or other opponents so that he can gain access to the paths to and he can expand his empire. Okay, this is the first point. And second point is that he was a very tolerant ruler. Okay, so you will find that he was a Muslim, but he did not want to impose his Islam on anybody else. So in his kingdom, you will find there were people who were Hindus and they were equally respected. In fact, you will also find that Akbar was the one who actually created Govind Dev Ji temple in many places, including the Vrindavan. So this shows you that how tolerant as a leader he was. So that is why he decided that there should be no tax like jizya. And that is why you can see here that Akbar actually abolishes jizya. Jizya is a tax which is put on non-Muslims. Okay, so he abolishes that tax. Now after invading Malwa, he actually invades Gondwana also. Okay, and then you will find in 1565 to 67, there is like Uzbek rebellion. Basically, Uzbek are these tribes or the people belonging to Uzbekistan, and they're coming from the northwest and wanting to invade India. Okay, in 1568 you will find there's a fall of Chittor because Akbar goes on the war and then finally wins the war. 1569 you will find that he wins a war against Ranthambore and Kalinjar, and then he and his wife gave birth to Salim, and Salim is none other Jahangir. Okay, so now after Babur studying Humayun, then Shesha Suri is not part of Mughal Empire. He's a different you can say dynasty, which is Suri dynasty. After Humayun, you have studied Akbar, and after Akbar, you will be studying about Jahangir, okay, which is basically Prince Salim. So now you will find that there is a birth of Jahangir or Prince Salim, and in 1569 to 76, you will find that Akbar wanted to build another capital city which is nearby to Delhi, okay, but which is which has much more administrative buildings, a concept that Akbar wanted to start, and that is why he chose Fatehpur Sikri. So Fatehpur Sikri is a place which is near today's Agra, and if you go to Agra, you will find that it is very near. And this is Fatehpur Sikri has a fort which has basically a Panch Mahal. It also has a mosque. Okay, Salim Chishti tomb also is there. Then you will find that this this particular place, Fatehpur Sikri, also has Jodhabai's palace. So there are a lot of things that is Fatehpur Sikri has, and it's like a big place where Akbar wanted to build a lot of administrative buildings also. Okay, and here you will find basically Indo-Islamic architecture. So now, like even from the architecture point of view or art and culture point of view, you should know that Delhi Sultanate had a particular kind of architecture, okay, wherein they introduced a lot of things. Like they were the first ones to introduce basically the concept of dome, okay, and arches. Because if you see that Indian architecture, specifically arches were not that common. We had this style common, Trabeate style, but it was the arcade style which came along with the Delhi Sultanate. So they were the one who basically introduced these minarets. Okay, then there is a jali work concept wherein if you go to any of these tombs etc., you will find there are a lot of jalis, because they believe in the concept of space, and secondly they believe in the concept of light. Then in every mosque you will find there is basically a water tank. This is to ensure three things. A is to basically those fountains that are running, since these generally mosques etc., they are present in the most of arid regions, so water when it evaporates, it actually creates a cooling atmosphere. Secondly is obviously the concept of purity, wherein if before entering the mosque, you're supposed to like wash your hands, etc., and feet, and then enter the mosque. Okay, and then third might be the beauty reason also, wherein if in the night basically the mosque will try to reflect itself in the water tank, creating a very sense of purity, like sort of very, you can say, like a peaceful feeling. Okay, so these are like the three reasons of why water tank be there, and all these elements are basically part of something called as the Indo-Islamic architecture. Okay, now, before we move forward, in Indo-Islamic architecture also, the two main kinds of architecture you will see are one from the Delhi Sultanate, okay, and one that they were like Mughal Empire brought. So, Mughal Empire might be like garden tombs, okay, then Char Bahag style, okay, and then like basically addition of more elements what was gotten by the Delhi Sultanate. But apart from that, having said that, you will also find that this is the time when Bijapur, Golconda, or have also having lot of architectural you can say architectural buildings, okay, and all these are built during this period only, so they also have their own particular style. Similarly, Vijayanagar will have their own particular style, and in Vijayanagar you will find lot of temples. So this is important for you. I'm repeating it again that this is only providing you a timeline. What you need to do is that you need to add few things to make it complete. Okay, because if we start doing that, this chapter will become non-ending. Okay, and we won't be able to complete this course in a year also. So what you need to do is basically have a sticky note ready. Start writing about art and culture, proper art and culture also in that period and everything, and stick it over. It will become really, really easy. Now, after this, okay, we have already studied that how Prince Salim is born and Akbar has tried to basically build Fatehpur Sikri. So Akbar annexes Gujarat, and you will find that this is the time when 1570s is the time when Mewar region is coming now under the a great ruler called Maharana Pratap, and he is the same Maharana Pratap with which Akbar will be fighting later Battle of Haldighati. Okay, at this particular time only you will find that Akbar goes and builds and constructs this Buland Darwaza, which is in the Fatehpur Sikri only. He also takes some administrative reforms, and you should know that Akbar was very, very famous for his administrative reforms. Okay, in 1576 there is conquest of Bengal, and simultaneously in 1576 there is a battle of Haldighati. Now, battle of Haldighati has been asked a lot of times, and before we move forward, just let's have a snippet of it. So 1576 is the time, and it is fought between Akbar, which is basically the Mughal emperor, versus basically Maharana Pratap, who he is the Mewar ruler. Okay, Mewar is basically Udaipur ruler. Now Akbar is not fighting the war. Who is fighting instead of Akbar? Basically, the war is being fought by Raja Mansingh. Okay, and this Raja Mansingh is basically belonging to that Amber. Okay, Amber region. So he's the ruler of Amber region, and you must be knowing that Raja Mansingh was in a very high mansab in the Akbar's administration. So he was fighting the war with Maharana Pratap. Okay, and in this war you will realize that Maharana Pratap had a very small army. If you say he had only 10,000 army men, you will find that Akbar had almost a lakh army, as about a lakh people. So even like elephants and all these artilleries, etc., they were very, very in a very huge amount with Akbar, but not with Maharana Pratap. But still, the battle was inconclusive because Maharana Pratap was not dead. Okay, he actually, you can say, he fought very bravely. He was able to escape the war, and then he came back again and got his, Mewar region back from the Mughals. Okay, so and one important thing about this war was that Maharana Pratap army had basically tribal people in his army, which were called as the Bhil. So there comes the importance of Bhil. So Bhil is a tribe, you can say a scheduled tribe in Rajasthan, and this tribe basically fought with Maharana Pratap bravely against the Mughal accession. Okay, and here it is written that there is a defeat of Maharana Pratap, but if you go and read the Rajasthan books, you will find that they have written that the war was inconclusive, and that is a lot of even in the lot of places also it is written, because see, war is decided whether it is inconclusive or not on the basis of whether you were able to achieve your objective, and the objective here was to actually bring Maharana Pratap to Akbar and to ensure that Mewar remains under them, which was not fulfilled, and hence it is said that the war was inconclusive. But here, am I telling you again, you need to see what NCERT has written. Then in 1579, there is infallibility decree issued by the Akbar, which is, you can say, not that important. But in 1582, there is something very important happening, which is the proclamation of Deen-e-Ilahi. Okay, so now you might have heard the religions of Hinduism, Islam, or Buddhism, Jainism, Christianity. But then Akbar wanted to introduce basically two things. Okay, one was the philosophy and other was the religion. So his philosophy was of Sul-e-Kul, okay, and his religion was of Deen-e-Ilahi. Okay, so now this philosophy of Sule Cole is basically the universal philosophy wherein he has taken the, compiled them in one religion. These are the best values present and you should imbibe them. Okay, this religion was carried forward after Akbar by his son Jahangir and also by Shah Jahan and also by, okay, also by one more person, if you know, his name was Birbal. Okay, so there were few people who actually followed this religion and I've told you who all followed it. Okay, in 15, after basically proclamation of Deen-e-Ilahi, in 1585 there was annexation of Kabul, and in 1586 there was conquest of Kashmir. In 1590 to 1600, then you'll again find that he is going further south and he is annexing like Sindh, Odisha, Balochistan, and lot of like these places which are south of the empire. And then 1600, as we finally know that this is not the part of Mughal Empire. This is somewhere happening in the world area. Like this is what is happening in India as Mughal Empire. But here you will find in UK, finally the Queen Elizabeth has basically issued a charter to British East India Company that they can now go and actually in the search of India, and then can basically become the trading company, okay, of India and the UK. Okay, that is why there's a charter of establishing the British East India Company. And in 1601, you will find that Prince Salim, actually he rebelled, he was arrested, but finally, in 1 year later only, Akbar died. Okay, now after Akbar's death, the third ruler you will be studying in the Mughal Empire, the fourth ruler you will be studying in the Mughal Empire would be basically Prince Salim, also known as Jahangir. Okay, so here you will find that Jahangir is basically acceding the throne in 1605, and in 1606 you will find that there was a revolt by Prince Khusrau, okay, who was captured, and then here you will find that Jahangir was not in a very good terms with the Sikh kingdom, okay, or the Sikh guru. So if you know that Sikhism as a religion has basically 10 gurus, right? Because after the 10th guru, which is Guru Gobind Singh, basically you can say Guru Granth Sahib, it was given the status of the guru, and then no other guru was actually like born. So the first guru was Guru Nanak, okay, who established Sikhism, and after him came many gurus, and the last one was Guru Gobind Singh. Now, what is your homework is to write in the comment box below the names of all these 10 gurus and what happened in particular, like guru's time. For example, Guru Nanak was the one who introduced the concept of langar. Then came the Guru Lehna or Guru Angad, okay, wherein he is actually carrying forward Guru Nanak's legacy. Then there is, there are many gurus actually in between. Okay, then you will find that there is a fifth guru, which actually is contemporary, who is contemporary to the Jahangir, who's a Mughal ruler, and this fifth guru names is Arjun Dev, and he came in conflict with Jahangir, and finally you will find that Jahangir executes him. Okay, which is bad because this actually became the point of animosity between the Mughal emperor and as well as Sikh empire. Okay. Finally, 1607 to 1609, there is an embassy to Goa. This is not important. This is what basically you can say Britishers are doing to establish their power in India. So 1600, they have been just issued a charter by the UK's, king and queen that now, okay, fine, you can form a company who can trade exclusively with East. See, why is a charter needed? It's just a company, right? It's a private company of trading. So they are asking that since they are going for an unknown expedition and they don't know what they'll get, so they're asking from the queen that you will not be giving the permission to trade in the East, okay, to any other company apart from us, and this is what is charter about. Okay, so in 1600 they've gotten a charter to deal with India. In finally 1608 you will realize that Sir Captain Hawkins, he arrives at Jahangir's court. Okay, and when he arrives at Jahangir's court, you will realize that these Britishers now they knew very well how to actually lure an emperor. Okay, and that is what Sir Captain Hawkins also did. In 1610 to 20, you will find that Jahangir is waging wars with Ahmednagar, which is basically, you can say, after Bahmani Kingdom, one of these constituent states. Then 1611, he marries Noor Jahan. And Noor Jahan is a very, very important figure in the history because she actually built the tomb of her father. And this you can say became the first tomb wherein red sandstone plus marble were used together. Okay, so now here in 1612, you will find that end of Usman Khan's rebellion in Bengal. This is not that important, but 1615 to 18. Okay, this is important, wherein Sir Thomas Roe's embassy is actually coming and he's asking for more permissions. Okay, and you can say farmans. And 1616 is the time when there is a bubonic plague in India. Before we move forward, since there is so much already about corona happening, you should know that plagues are of three types. Okay, first of all, what is a plague? See, plague is basically a disease which is caused by bacteria. Okay, a particular kind of bacteria strain which is spread by these smaller animals like rodents, mice, and rats, etc., or fleas or flies, etc. Okay, through them it spreads, and you will find that it spreads to a larger population such that you will find large amount of mortalities taking place. So plague has happened even in the past also, starting from even 450 BC or something, which is basically before Christ, somewhere around the time when probably modern empire was there. So plagues have been happening since then, and plagues are happening even today. Okay, but they are obviously today they're because of the improved water sanitation conditions. Okay, and you can say the improved quality of drinking water and use of particularly you can say more attention towards hygiene. The plagues have the occurrence of plagues first of all is reduced, and second is their frequency, and third is the you can say the death rate or the mortality caused by plague is also reduced today. But in earlier times, we will find one after other there were many plagues. So the most famous the plagues all started around 450 BC. Okay, and then you will find that 160 AD, 250 AD, they are just happening one after other. But plague that you should be remembering is one that happened in 1350s, which was basically the plague that is called as the Black Death. Okay, because it actually led to the death of a lot of people, almost one third of population. After that, the plague that you should remember is the 1616 one, which happened in India. Okay, so that is why I'm saying, please just remember few things because these become important specifically for prelims this year, as you already know that corona is a pandemic. And plagues, before we move forward, you should know there are three types. One is bubonic, one is basically blood type, and then third is pneumonic. Okay, so pneumonic is the one which affects your lung and the respiratory organs. Bubonic is the one which affects your lymph nodes or the immunity system, and the blood one is the one which affects the blood system, like wherein the bacteria has now entered the bloodstream. Okay, so now India had which one plague? Which India had the bubonic plague, wherein your immunity system gets impacted. Now in 1622, there is death of Prince Khusrau, and you will find that Kandahar is lost to the Persians. Okay, then basically after Jahangir, his son exceeds the throne, and his son is basically Shah Jahan. Okay, and he's also called as the Prince Khurram. So just like Jahangir is another name of Salim, so you will find that Shah Jahan is another name of Khurram. Okay, and see, since I already told you that there is no particular rule that elder brother will get all the property, so here you will find that lot of times the princes, like the king's sons, are actually not only fighting among themselves, they're fighting with their father also. Okay, they might even like put them in a house arrest or something so that they get the throne. So that's what you find here, that Prince Kharram revolts against his own father Shah Jahan. Okay, and here in this particular time only you will be finding this another empire called as the Marathas. Okay, Marathas have already wielded lot of power, and you will find that Shah Ji, who is Shivaji's father, is basically brought in the service of Ahmednagar. Okay, and here in 1627 finally Shivaji is born. Now, just in that same year, you will find when Shivaji is born, there is death of Jahangir. And after Jahangir, who took the throne? Prince Khurram, which is basically Shah Jahan. So he becomes the emperor or the Mughal emperor. Now, 1628 to 1635, you will find that the peacock throne was constructed. And this is also the time when we will find that famines have come in Gujarat and the Deccan region. But I mean, this is important, but not that important because we don't have to study much about it. But what you need to remember is 1631 is the death of Mumtaz. Now, this death of Mumtaz and Mumtaz Mahal, okay, that we already know what Shah Jahan built in the memory of his wife, okay, which is basically the Taj Mahal. So that we all know is present in Agra and is also basically seven wonders of the world and is also mentioned in the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Okay. Then after that, you will find that, in 1632 and all, There are Deccan campaigns being done, which is basically to end Ahmednagar, Bijapur, and Golconda. And in 1636, okay, finally Aurangzeb. So we've already moved from from Jahangir to Shah Jahan, and now Shah Jahan has a four sons. One is Dara Shikoha, and then there is Aurangzeb also. Now, Dara Shikoha has not been mentioned here, but you should know that Dara Shikoha was the one who actually tried to, somewhere establish peace between Hindu and Muslim, saying that they both talked about the same things. Dara Shikoha was the one who actually studied a lot of Upanishads and translated them from Sanskrit to Persian so that people could understand that how Upanishads, which are actually the Hindu mythology books, etc., and how they relate to, how they also speak of the same thing what Quran says. Okay, so Dara Shikoh is a very tolerant and a very, you can say, very calm figure, but Aurangzeb is the one who ultimately succeeds, and because he house arrests his own father and he revolts against his father to get the kingdom. And how does he get it? Because Aurangzeb has become very powerful and very, you can say, popular also because of his successful campaigns where he is always winning. So Aurangzeb was appointed as a viceroy of Deccan, and there you will find that he actually recaptures, a lot of lost territories of the Mughal Empire. Then there is 1638, there is Kandahar, which is also recaptured. And you will find that in 1648, the capital has shifted to Delhi, okay, which is Shahjahanabad. Now, before I move forward, just like Mumbai is actually a combination of seven islets, okay, small islets, like there is Little Kolaba, then there is like bigger Kolaba, then then you will find there is Worli. So just then there is Mahim. So there are like seven cities which combine together form Mumbai. Similarly, you will find that Delhi is also a combination of lot of cities. Okay, so there is one old Delhi, which is basically the Delhi of the Tomars. Okay, Tomar Delhi, wherein when the Hindu rulers used to rule. Okay, Tomars used to rule. Then that was the Delhi. Then you will find that there has been always expansion. Okay, to include more area. So after Thomas, you will find came the Delhi Sultanate, and in Delhi Sultanate, you will find that horse cars, etc. is added. Then after that, you will find that this one. Sorry. After Hoska, see what is happening is Delhi Sultanate. You should just remember the dynasties. For example, slave dynasty, Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Sayyids, and Lodhis. And each one of them has tried to add something. Like we will find in Tughlaq, they have added Tughlaqabad. And then by Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq and Firozshah Tughlaq added Firozshah Kotla. Okay. So he has added Firozshah Kotla. Now, similarly, you will find you knew that there was Humayun, and Humayun basically wanted to establish a city of Deenbana. Okay. So just like that, I'm telling you that even Delhi had a composition, or you can say a conglomerate of seven cities, seven different cities, which shows you that how Delhi grew. So that is why I'm telling you this is an important part of your art and culture, and you should cover it there. I've tried to given you a gist of the empires and about the cities that have been constructed in the different times, but please remember them. Okay. So now. So now when we know that, there's Aurangzeb is coming and he has been appointed as a viceroy of Deccan, but still Shah Jahan is there and he's alive. But there is a war of succession amongst his sons, okay, which I told you, Dara Shikoh or Aurangzeb also. But ultimately, Aurangzeb will win that war. Okay, and this is the same time when you will find that Shivaji is also increasing his power. He's encroaching upon the Mughal territories as well as the Adil Shahi territories of Bijapur. Okay, there are many battles fought, and finally you will find that Aurangzeb is able to succeed his father, which is basically Shah Jahan. And then Shah Jahan is imprisoned, and along with the Aurangzeb's sister, who actually takes care of Shah Jahan, and he is house arrested in a place from where he can actually see Taj Mahal throughout his life. So that's sad, but I mean, what you can do if actually one wants to just be a ruler. And finally, in 1659, there was execution of Dara Shikoh, and there is a murder of Afzal Khan by Shivaji. So, I mean, you must be wondering that how sad, okay? Like first you house arrest your own father and then you actually kill your own brother. So now, after this, we'll be studying both Mughal as well as Marathas together. Okay. Otherwise, what will happen? We will lose a track of what is happening when, because these both empires are running simultaneously, and we will actually, if we leave one and only study one, then we won't be able to integrate Marathas again in that history. So what we've done is we have tried to create a wall chart wherein you have both of them together. Okay. So here you will find that in 1660, Mir Jumla is appointed as the governor of Bengal, and here basically Murad is executed, and cession of Bombay is done by Portuguese to English. Now this particular part, okay, 1661, this cession of Bombay is happening to English. This is basically happening via why? Because you will find that Bombay's prince is marrying Portuguese princess. Okay, and since they are marrying, so basically Portuguese are giving Bombay as a dowry to the like Britishers prince. Okay, and that is why like Bombay, which was a great territory of Portuguese, it came under the control of Britishers. Okay, now this is not happening within Mughal Empire. This is happening like outside, and we need to study it. Now, then you will find that 1663, Shivaji actually conquers the north and south Konkan from the Mughal viceroys of Deccan, and Shastia Khan, okay, he narrowly escapes the attempt on life at Pune. 1664, you will find that Shivaji has now started attacking, and he attacks at Surat. Okay. 1665, he actually, you will find that Shivaji, in spite of being like so powerful, he is defeated by Savai Jai Singh. And Savai Jai Singh is basically the ruler of Amber. Okay, that Kachawa Rajputs I told you, that only. And then you will find that there is a treaty of Purandahar, which is signed between Shivaji and Savai Jai Singh. Now, Savai Jai Singh is also, you will find that he is also just like Mansingh, he was also a Mansab during the Mughal court, and he was at a very high rank. Okay, so Savai Jai Singh is able to actually conclude a treaty of Purandar between him and Shivaji. Okay, and finally in 1666, Shah Jahan dies, and this is a time when you will find that Shivaji also visits to Agra, and he escapes because there was a treaty of Purandahar, but Shivaji doesn't follow it, and finally Shivaji is captured, but he actually manages to escape. Then 1669, there is a see after Shah Jahan, you will find that he is becoming little non-tolerant, and he actually prohibits the Hindu. Sorry, after Shah Jahan is Aurangzeb, and Aurangzeb is actually becoming intolerant towards the other religions, and he reimposes jizya. He actually prohibits the Hindu worship. Okay, he also, you will find that he also does things which are you can say very Kattarwadi Muslim types. Okay, he is like actually a great Sunni follower, Sunni Muslim tradition follower, and even he is not tolerant towards the Shias also. He demolishes temples, he prohibits Hindus worship. He also will find that this is a time when there was a first Jat rebellion also. Okay, and here you will find that Shivaji is also at its prominent peak. Okay, when Aurangzeb is there, Shivaji is also like doing a lot of things. He's attacking. He's trying to expand his empire. So see, Marathas were very famous for two things. Okay, one was Chauth, another was Sardeshmukhi. So Chauth was basically, so they used to take these taxes from the areas which are outside Maratha Empire, but they used to invade them and say that if you want to avoid our invasion, you need to pay Chauth and Sardeshmukhi. Okay, so people living outside their empires, they used to pay these two particular taxes. Now Chauth was 25% of the whatever revenue you have produced, and Sardesh Mukti is extra 10%. Okay, so you must be wondering, oh my God, this is a lot of tax. But if you have to not allow Marathas to come and invade you, this is like a very small amount that they are paying. Okay, then in 1674 you will find like there's like a lot of happenings in the Maratha Empire as well. But simultaneously, you will find that Sikh gurus are also coming, and you can say somewhere that we have reached till ninth guru now. Okay, so here you will find that Guru Tegh Bahadur is executed by Aurangzeb, and which is obviously not liked by the next guru, which is the Guru Gobind Singh, and he introduces the concept of Khalsa, wherein you can also take up arms. Okay, so taking up of arms to protect your faith has been done even after Guru Arjan, like fifth Guru's death. But here you will find that 5 Ks, like which was Kesh, Kirpan, Kada, then Gacha, and there's one more, right? What is there one more? That which is basically, which is what? So you need to tell me in the comment box. So there are 5 elements or 5 Ks, which 5K, okay, which are basically part of Sikhism that you need to tell me. And Khalsa was also introduced by the Guru Gobind Singh. Okay. And finally, as I told you, that Aurangzeb introduces or reintroduces Jizya again, because he's obviously very non-tolerant towards the other religions. And in 1679 to 81, you will find that there is a Rajput war, and then there is a rebellion also. Finally, in 1680, there is death of Shivaji, and his son Shambhaji actually succeeds the Shivaji. Now, 1680 is also the time when Aurangzeb wants to go to Deccan, because see, Aurangzeb believes first of all in Deccan there are a lot of you can say powerful like rulers of that of Marathas, and if he defeats them, obviously he'll be able to have a capture over entire India. And he also believes that, like going to Deccan might give him access to a lot of those lands, like fertile lands, wherein more agriculture produce can be done, and and certainly you can have more revenue to the state. Okay, here is a time when there will be second Jat rebellion also. And in 1686 to 87, you will find that there is Aurangzeb who is now establishing conquesting. Okay, who is basically winning over Bijapur and Golconda. In 1689, Shambhaji captured and he was tortured brutally and he was executed. But you will finally find that, Shambhaji is the son of Shivaji. Okay, he is actually executed. And then accession of Raja Ram to the Maratha throne. And this Raja Ram basically is the younger brother of Shambhaji. And this is, you will realize that after this is the problem of succession starting even within the Maratha Empire. In 1691, there is defeat of Jats and Mughal Empire has reached its zenith. Okay, this is all under Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb is a very, very powerful ruler. Okay, he has stopped all the alcohol drinking, etc. in his, you can say, empire, and he has even, stopped all the music and festival celebrations and dances, etc. because he believes that, that can lead to people wasting their energies and, other things when they should not be. In 1700 to 1707, you will find that Tarabai, who is the widow of Raja Ram, she rules as a regent. And then, Shahu, who is the son of Sambhaji, is released from the Mughal captivity and he arrives in the Deccan. And you will find that now there is a war of succession going between two people. One is the son of Shivaji, who was captured by the Mughal Empire but has now been released. And second is the widow of the, another son called as Rajaram. So now you will find that Maratha has been divided into two substates. Okay, one is basically Shahu at Satara and Tarabai or Shivaji too at Kolhapur. Okay, and Peshwa Balaji Vishwanath, he joins the Shahu, like he supports the Shahu. Now, before we move forward, I know you must be in confusion that who are these people in Marathas? See, Marathas, as you know, we say that Maratha was a confederacy. It was a confederacy of five, you can say five families ruling in different areas. So there was Peshwas in Pune. Okay, then similarly there was Holkars. Then there was Baroda. Then there was Bhosles. Then there was Sindhias. And then there was Gaikwads. Okay, so these are the five families ruling in the five different regions, and that is why Maratha was called as the confederacy. And you will find that out of these, like Peshwa is the most powerful one who's trying to bind them all together. Okay, now Peshwa Balaji Vishwanath, you will find that he is supporting whom? He is supporting Shahu. Okay, and at this particular time only you will find that Aurangzeb dies in Ahmednagar. And remember, I told you 1707 as a year to remember. This is why, because here you will find this starts the decline of Mughal Empire. Why? Because Aurangzeb has died. And now it is very, very difficult for his successors who are already weak, okay, and who are already facing a lot of rebellions from all the sides to actually maintain such vast empire. And this is when you will find the empire starts shaking and breaking by the forces of Marathas, Mysore, Nizam, there is Sikh, and then there are, other states that are also forming. And then there is invasions from the northwestern region also. And then there are Europeans that have also come into the picture. So 1707 till the time when Aurangzeb was there, this is important because after Aurangzeb you will find a lot of history is going to change, and after this specifically will be coming with the modern Indian history. But before that we have to read about the events that also happened after 1707.